thanks everyone for joining. The purpose of this is to kind of take people through the cross-party services ways of working. So we have gone through this session with a number of parties already, and kind of sort feedback, and this is very much around the approach. I was spoken about this in kind of general terms at 2 weeks previously, but just wanted to kind of start getting some feedback from people on the approach, and then to start soliciting a few more kind of scenarios where people believe there might be cross-party scenarios involved. Yes, so we've issued a purpose and a problem statement as part of this. And here's the purpose and objective. I'll not read every single word on the slides, but we'll kind of summarize. The purpose is to provide a framework on exactly how we're going to support the program with kind of multi service desk interactions. The objective of this session is to agree the principle in the approach. Sorry, it's just a bit of background noise from somebody. The outputs will be suggested scenarios, and then for people to provide further feedback. And the main output from this will be a run book, which will form part of the service operations manual. But there's every chance we're going to keep that as a completely separate document as well, and just reference the main parts in the service operations manual. But we're happy to take feedback from people on that. And the idea will be that it will include the flows for the scenarios, triage steps, and the RACI for the service desk, including kind of major incidents. So I'll just talk about the flows for the scenarios for a second. So we've been looking at kind of various scenarios and flows, and I'll come on to an example flow shortly. But we're looking at it, we feel that whilst there may be a large number of scenarios eventually when we've finally kind of got all the scenarios gathered together, there will be probably a limited number of flows, because those a certain flow may well cover a number of scenarios. So that's what's meant by the flows may cross more than one scenarios, and that'll be referenced back in the main run book. And the triage steps is primarily around the kind of activities that we're going to support people to undertake prior to logging cases, and that's not necessarily just logging stuff with Elexon, but that will be logging stuff with other parties as well. Any questions at this point? Okay, I'll kind of move on. I'll go the right way. And again, so I've got a problem statement there. It's quite wordy. Hi, Johnny.
Sorry, Mark. Very late hand there. The run book, is that the same thing as the cross-service desk model that's out for consultation on Monday, or is this something else?
The run book is the kind of the operating guide, Johnny. So it's almost like a service operations manual version of this. So the model is something that's pulled together to describe the overarching process. Ian, if you're on, do you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah. So I think probably model is probably the wrong terms going out for consultation. It's just defining sort of the overall approach, and I suppose, yes, as model for consultation, where the run book, as Mark mentioned, that gets into the absolute granular detail of scenarios and sort of flowing out those different scenarios as well, which we will keep capturing and putting it into the run book, potentially to go in the operations manual, but it depends on how many scenarios and flows there are. So that's why we're sort of thinking probably it might need to be a separate reference document.
No, that's fine. I was just, there was a mention of consultation on Monday, PSG earlier. So yeah, so this won't form part of the consultations issued on Monday. The consultation will be on overarching principles. So this would then be based on.
Exactly, bang on, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Also, Johnny, just one final point as well that myself and Ian were discussing earlier. The run book will be a live document, so this isn't a case of we get to M10 and then we close it. As further scenarios get developed and come to light over the life of the program, year, 18 months time or whatever, we will continue to add to the run book and iteratively update it where there are errors and where there are new scenarios that we've not thought of at this stage.
Yeah, that makes sense, Mark. I think we would just need to consider the
governance
run book. Yeah, the governance around it. So I mean, if the run book's guidance, that makes absolute sense and that works. If the run book's got obligations on parties, then it would need to go through some sort of approval process every time it was updated. So I think it's just working out where that sits and how it's governed.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So, so we've got the problem statement that's kind of written out there. Like I say, I'm sure whilst we've been talking there, people have had an opportunity to kind of read through that, and it is just the challenge around working across different parties and how we kind of log stuff with different parties. Sorry, excuse me. Service desks. So initially, the service desks that we've been kind of speaking to are listed there, and this slide deck will be shared more kind of widely following this call if it's not been done already. Alex, hi.
Yeah, can you just go back to the previous slide, please?
Yeah, got that one.
Yeah, so where you've got the list there, you've got where was it now? You've got Data Communications Company DCC for Smart DSP.
Yeah.
Obviously, we also cover the switching desk, the CSS, so switching service as well. So I don't know whether you want to just adjust that to reflect that, because it isn't just DSP.
Yeah, switches. Yeah. So I'm just making a note now, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. It's just people may wonder where is switching.
No, that's okay. And
I think Alex, CSS is on there. It's just not on in the same line. It seems to be.
It's second from bottom.
Oh yeah,
so,
sorry.
Yeah,
sorry,
it might be worthwhile putting them two things together or separating it out. Yeah.
I'll capture the actions, Mark, so you don't need to worry about that.
Oh, thanks, Sandra. Thanks.
No problem.
So the example flows and scenarios that we've come up with, can everyone see this? I know people have had problems previously oh, sorry, Johnny, go on.
Sorry, Mark, if you just go back to the previous slide. I don't want to spend too much time on
the
one we were talking about. Yeah, on the weeds, but the one afterwards. The service desk one. Yeah. There's no such thing as a Retco service desk, so you can take that one off.
Okay, sorry, I thought we changed that. Sorry. Okay, yep.
But yeah. Other than that, I just noticed that as you're going through.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny.
Yeah, and just sorry, it's Alex again. Rather than sending you back, you've got switching on here. I can see next to bottom, but then you've got. Why have you got two? You've got the DCC service desk on line 3, and then you've got smart metering service desk on line 4.
We'll get that corrected. That's fine.
I'm not sure the differences between those two. That might be deliberate. That might be fine, but I can't. We've got two service desks or service centres. One associated with smart DSP, and one associated with switching.
And then, Mark, the switching service desk, if the owner for the smart metering service desk is Setco, then the owner for the switching service desk should be Retco. Not DCC.
Yeah.
DCC is a service provider.
Excellent. We'll get that updated.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you.
Okay. So the example flow, can everyone see that? I've had complaints from people previously that it was a bit too small. If anybody's got any problems, can they please? It's too small.
It's too small.
Yep.
Yeah, a bit small.
Is that better for people? I'll take silence.
Yeah, that's better.
Is okay. I'll just zoom back out a second just so I can read the text at the top. So this, like we say, this is an example scenario, but it's an example based on a real life example. So supplier has not received the agent appointment status notification interface, IF35, in a timely fashion. As part of the scenario, we've made a couple of assumptions, and we'll be recording assumptions as part of the scenario capture piece as well. So the assumption here, if IF has been processed by SMRS correctly, and IF 32 has been received by the supplier, and then the LDSO acts in their role as SMRS registration service provider. So we're making some assumptions there. So the flow on this one would start at the supplier side, and we're not calling out individual organisation names at that point. We're keeping it generic to say supplier. So start the process is not received. We would then look for the supplier to check in the DIP portal. If the message is in the queued state, it'd be then a case of looking into the supplier endpoint. If it's not, then be a case of logging with the LDSO. So excuse me a second. Oh, sorry. And the next swim lane down would be for the LDSO to investigate triage, and then continue the investigations. If it is then resolved, it'd be a case of updating the supplier, issue resolved, back in. So if the issue isn't resolved when they get back to the supplier, it's a case of the message will be queued and check the endpoint. If it is resolved, end the process. But the LDSO would be responsible for updating the supplier at that point and resolving their incident. If upon investigation the LDSO can't resolve the incident, was the message sent to DIP? If it was yes. Hi, Carl.
Yeah, just a quick one on the top swim lane, the supplier one.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, got. Yeah.
So investigate supplier endpoint. Are there not two options as to what happens after that investigation, or is that just automatically assumed that fixes the process?
Yeah, certainly from the work we've done from speaking to kind of various technical parties, that would be once the process has been complete and checking, and Elexon have gone through the process of checking DIP, it would be a case of it points to a supplier endpoint issue.
There is. What would the supplier have to do? Sorry.
It would be a case of the supplier investigating their particular endpoints to see if there's an issue on the endpoint side of things. Because at that point, there's nothing the LDSO or Elexon could do. The message is gone. The message has been sent. If it's not been processed by the endpoint, that would be for the supplier to investigate.
Sorry, Mark, to jump in. But
yeah.
You mentioned Elexon there, but where is Elexon in this?
They're the third swim lane down. We haven't got that far yet.
but exactly, because the question was what that box means, and
yes,
you mentioned it. But you're mentioning Elexon there, but there's no loop from the supplier into Elexon in that swim lane.
That's because it goes via the LDSO first.
Yeah, I think this is the particular scenario we're looking at here, Mike, and I think the principle for all this is that before participants raise an incident with a centralized service desk, is that they've done some level of triage themselves. So I think that's the general principle here, and in this example, they can undertake some triage by looking in the DIP portal, which will show the status of message delivery. So I think about it more as the principle here is that we're expecting participants to have done a level of triage before they raise incidents into a central service desk.
Yeah, I agree with that principle. It just the question was the investigate supplier endpoint. That was the question of what that entails, and then Elexon was mentioned. I just from that question I couldn't see where Elexon came in.
Oh, so yeah. So I think in this particular scenario, they would have checked the DIP portal and they would have said, the DIP portal's reporting that they received a message, but it's got a HTTPS status of 500, which indicates that the DIP couldn't communicate with the supplier endpoint, for example. So in that case, the expectation would be that they, before raising any incidents, they would have investigated their own infrastructure for any any failure.
And that needs to include their adapter provider if they're using one as well, because they'd be responsible for their adapter provider.
Yeah.
Essentially, we're saying in old money terms, when we get to that investigate supplier endpoint, you're saying the message is sat at the supplier's gateway waiting to get in.
Well, because in the context of this, because this is over just the public internet, same as like the CSS, for example, then they would have tried to establish a HTTPS connection between the DIP URL and the suppliers or the CSS and the suppliers, and that would have failed at that point. So they wouldn't be able to see anything on their side of things, but they would be able to investigate whether they have their endpoint is active and he's active on the internet, if you like.
Does that satisfy that particular question, or do we have something to take away there?
We'd probably have to speak to a couple of our parties. Sorry, so I'm from the REC operational account manager team.
Yeah. Trying
to think with my old supplier hat on. So I probably just have to check with a couple of parties.
That's
that
okay.
that investigation.
We're open to feedback on this. This isn't a one-time go at this. If we're welcoming feedback, and this over the last kind of 3 or 4 times we've shared this with people, that we have changed it. We have updated it iteratively as we've gone along. So it will change. So if people have any feedback where they think things either aren't clear or are not accurate, happy to change it.
Because like a good lesson for when we first went live with CSS, for example, is we had an awful lot of messages that were failing to get delivered from the CSS. The CSS was building up large backlogs, and when you looked at it, it was actually that they were trying to deliver a set of messages to Scottish Power, and for whatever reason, Scottish Power's endpoint wasn't active. So that's what this sort of principle is here, and I think it's be common across a lot of the central services, is that where possible, we expect participants, suppliers, and other participants to use the tools that they've got available to check the status of some of these transactions, and if they can see that a message has failed to be delivered, as in this scenario, that indicates that there's an issue on their side of the infrastructure rather than on the central service side of the infrastructure.
So thank you.
Okay, Nigel, you've been very patient there.
That's all right. Hi, Mark. It's me in my usual DCP hat. Sorry, Nigel.
It's okay. It's okay, mate.
The one comment I've got is just around some of the terminology. In the first swim lane, supplier's fine, but it's when you drop down below that, like as you can see there, the LDSO updates the supplier. As a DCP, we'll be doing a lot of work on behalf of the supplier. So if the LDSO just updated the supplier and we weren't kept in the loop, that could mean that things didn't happen in a timely fashion. So I think Paul Pettit just mentioned it as well. I think that needs to update DCP stroke supplier stroke DCP. I think in your text. So
Yeah, I agree, Nigel.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you. No worries.
Sorry, I know you're making notes, Andrew, but it's just for the flow. It just helps me do my
no problem.
there.
No problem.
And hi, Jackie.
Hi. Yeah. I appreciate you with the scenarios that you're, and this is a specific one, and you don't want to necessarily be going round and round in loops. But I have a slight concern about the fact that a supplier raises a concern, they haven't had a message come through to the LDSO. LDSO says, no, nothing wrong with our end. But then it's LDSO's responsibility to then notify, to log the incident with Elexon.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And that's the bottom part of their swim lane here.
Which I find a concern.
I think in that context, though, Jackie, that would be, at that point, that would be the LDSO would have conducted, triage themselves, either looking at their own systems or, including sort of DCP elements within that as well. And they would ascertain that, as far as their systems are concerned, they had successfully delivered that message. So I think it'd be under that context, that you believe that you now believe that there's an incident in the dip because you believe that you've successfully delivered the message. So I think you're now identifying an incident that you believe your systems are working as expected, but the dip is now not working. And I think one of the key principles about this is that I think it would become very difficult for across the industry to manage incidents. If we sort of if we have this concept of sort of bouncing people around, and I think in this context, it's the LDSO who has then identified that they believe that there's a specific incident within the dip, and I think if from a triage point of view, it would only be at this point, the suppliers identified that the supplier can't see any messages have been sent by the LDSO. It would only be the LDSO when they're contacting the Elexon then who could provide any actionable evidence, if you like, for Elexon to be able to investigate that, because the supplier wouldn't be able to, because they have no context of the the transaction that occurred. It would need to be the LDSO then raising an incident with the dip, and they would be able to provide any evidence that demonstrates that they successfully sent that message, which would then allow the Elexon to undertake triage and undertake any investigation with their service providers.
But equally, you've got nothing going back to the supplier to say that the LDSO has looked at it, and there's no
using that portal, probably the ISD Salesforce portal, these errors were be processed and recorded in the Salesforce table.
Yeah, so basically
for the support
oversight, we can store the.
Sorry. Oh, so that's just cross-talking. I think in that context, though, Jackie, what we'd expect is that the LDSO leaves that incident open. So they'd respond to that incident saying, we believe that we've successfully sent the transaction. We've now raised a case with the dip service provider. And so I think the principle there is that that would remain open. Now the clock stops obviously from a resolution point of view on the LDSO side, because that particular issue has now been passed across to Elexon to investigate.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just obviously concerned about the volume of incidents that may be raised by suppliers that LDSOs are having to review, where there's no issue with their own system, but they're having to to triage that on behalf almost of the suppliers.
And I think that's why it's really important, that we follow this principle, is that, there's a lot of tools that are going to be available to suppliers and other parties, to be able to self-triage, like the DIP portal. And so I think this is something that needs to be really important, that obviously suppliers are operating that. And I think probably there's probably a concept, Mark, that you've talked about previously, isn't there, having sort of a central party or key service provider sort of forum. And I would expect, if we are, once we go live, if we are seeing participants not following the process and meeting their own obligations, that's something that would need action to be taken. Because I think the key principle there is that what we absolutely want to avoid is people is people just very lazily sort of raising incidents through to parties, through to central services without doing undertaking their side of the sort of triage first. And I think the sort of defining what that evidence needs to be then is going to be really important, because we do want to avoid sort of people either raising spurious incidents, raising incidents at wrong service desk, or raising incidents that could have actually been resolved within that organisation itself.
So would there not be an opportunity then for that investigate supplier endpoint to be moved further forward in the triage process?
Yes, I see what you're saying there. I think maybe that's clarification, isn't it, to just say there's obviously tooling that's available that says what messages, but we'd also expect the supplier to have confirmed that their infrastructure is working correctly.
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial to the process.
Yeah,
certainly would avoid any issues where, like as you say, there's an issue with the supplier endpoint, such as you highlighted earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, we can call it out further in the process, Jackie. That's absolutely fine.
Thanks.
So we've got a few people with a hand up. Paul Band.
Yeah, hi, Paul Band, Electricity Northwest. Maybe a really stupid question. When you say log incident with LDSO, where exactly is that incident being logged?
When you got, sorry, John. Go on. Sorry, John.
Yeah, sorry. I think it would be using the existing help desk type arrangement that you guys would already have. When people are
sorry, that's what I'm asking, John. Which help desk? We do not operate any industry-facing help desks.
All right, I was under the impression that so if parties have issues with interacting with MPRS, how would they go about that currently, Paul?
It's not a service desk interaction, John, and at the moment, it's all bilateral contacts. Yeah, what you're proposing here is a whole different world. Now, if we take smart metering, for example, there is a DCC, central service desk operation. If you take faster switching, there's a central switching service, central service desk. There is no central service desk here. There is no DNO, sorry, no LDSO, industry-facing service desk to log an incident with.
Yeah, and what we set out in the service management strategy is that, that for issues such as this, Paul, that the participant would contact the relevant LDSOs.
Well, that's what I'm asking. How?
Support desk.
I think what the gentleman is saying is what's the methodology for contacting them? So are people going to be expected to use STEP, for example, which is part of the inquiry services? Or would they be expected to use, I don't know, the REC contract manager? Because I'm sure they'd be delighted to receive loads more emails.
No, I don't.
It's not clear how that would work.
I think the expectation in the strategy is that participants would be going direct to the relevant LDSO. So I think in there it's called out as sort of the LDSO's support desk.
But we don't have one.
Sorry,
John,
help desk.
and
Help desk. It's a terminology we use.
We replied to this accordingly when the service management strategy consultation came out earlier last year. We pointed this out. We do not operate industry-facing service desks. We have inquiry mechanisms such as SDEP, but there isn't a service desk. There is no portal for a supplier to log an incident with us.
Right.
So before you start designing these, interactions, we need to nail down the basics.
Yeah. So I think, well, I suppose if the current approach then, Paul, is it's SDEP, then I suppose that would be the that would need to be the mechanism that is used then. Well, I suppose Paul, obviously, things. If MPRS was having, so your instance of MPRS was having some technical issues, so it wasn't available for whatever reason. How would you currently communicate that out to any people who are wanting to interact? So suppliers wanting to send a D205 through. How would you communicate? And they couldn't for whatever reason. How would you sort of communicate that? Because I suppose the big difference at the moment is that obviously all their interactions are sort of quite batch process driven. You're using the DTS for those transactions. I suppose in the future, obviously, you're using you've obviously got your adapters that are sort of interfacing in near real time into the DIP.
So if you take the central switching service, for example, John, it's managed that would be managed as a major incident for a central switching service, not this fragmented model that's being presented here for market wide.
Yeah, that's
so.
Is, yeah.
Let me turn your scenario on its head. Right, I've got a problem with MPRS. Who do I tell? Do I have to go and contact 74 different suppliers and agents to let them know?
No, in that instance, if you're having an incident with MPRS and the expectation is, and that's impacting MHHS operations, then the expectation would be that you'd contact Elexon, and depending on the severity of that, the incident would be managed accordingly. Obviously, you'd own the incident through to resolution, but I think in that case, there would be an expectation that you would notify Elexon that you're now experiencing an issue with the service that you're providing.
So that's the answer to your part of the question, then, isn't it? If there was an issue with MPRS, I would tell Elexon in the market-wide context. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
What we've not answered is how does the supplier log an incident?
Yes, with you guys. Yeah. And so currently there wouldn't be any expectation that an LDSO would, I don't know, receive it. So if a supplier does have because we're talking about an individual transaction here, aren't we? Or it could be lots of individual transactions. But what would be your expectation currently around how the media, if you like, that a supplier could use to contact you to raise an issue? Is it exclusively SDEC, or is it do you have? Could it be a telephone call? What sort of...
it could be any of the above. In reality, John, it could be any of the above, because there is no portal there. There is no service desk portal operated by ourselves. So there's nowhere for a supplier to log on and raise an incident as such.
And would you sort of historically would that be is it that the supplier could use either approach, SDEP or a telephone call, or is it?
Yeah, it probably depends on the supplier. It depends on who they know, in the respective organisations. But you're talking about something that isn't laid out in the way that you're trying to lay it out here.
Yeah.
There are contact details within REC and BSC for particular businesses, sort of, the MPRS sort of lines and who they should, who would be contactable if there was an issue with MPRS and things like that. But I agree with Paul, we don't operate a service desk as such.
My concern here is you're trying to put a massively structured process on top of something that is currently, at the moment, inherently unstructured. So you need to set the foundations out before we get into any of this complexity.
Okay, so is that something, John, that you and I can take away to have a look at that element of that interaction?
Yeah.
So I guess that's going to require.
Do you mind if I come in on this, John, a second? Sorry, Paul Daniels. Yeah, so under the REC, the CSS arrangements, as has been discussed, is defined, so that parties would raise a query through ServiceNow into the CSS that we send out to each ERDS, which covers the CSS arrangements. I think the issue we've got is there's nothing currently in the BSC that dictates how these queries or anything else would get to MPRS service management. I think it's something we've been raising for a little while, but I think that's the gap that's been highlighted, that the SMRS arrangements aren't currently defined.
So Paul, I have a sort of question about, you might get, these different routes of people sort of raising issues, if you like, let's call it. How would you then log those? Do you all have your own sort of, case management type solution that would sort of log anything that's raised to you via different means, and then you would then assign out to people in the team to sort of review and triage and respond accordingly? Is that?
Well, speaking for Electricity North West, we don't have any sort of case management tool for that. No.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is something we're going to need to take for that particular element, John. We're probably going to need to take it offline, and I think part of the idea of presenting this as well was as an example flow rather than it being an agreed nailed on process. Although the feedback's been massively useful, but it was the purpose was to give people an idea as to how we'd like to lay these flows out. But Paul, I completely get your point that. If we've made an assumption there that that doesn't meet with the real world as you guys experience it, so we need to go away and rethink that element around how that bit works and how that is then interacted into from the supplier into the LDSO, I guess. And that's something we can pick up with this particular scenario as a separate piece. Does that sound like a sensible approach, John W?
Yeah, I think so. It needs to be something that works, doesn't it? But yeah, I think we do need to think about this because I think potentially the risk is obviously, this is more Paul, I suppose, is that I suppose LDSOs are taking on a much more sort of greater responsibility, aren't they, in terms of how central they are to all of the new processes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the risk is obviously that you're gonna be getting far more, having far more sort of contacts from other parties, as a result of the the new design.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll have to take that away and have a look at this one particular flow and scenario, John, because I think it's probably there's some elements there that that logging of the incident with the LDSO that Paul B has brought up. That it's going to be fundamental, I think, to a lot of the flows and how those interactions are going to work.
Yeah. I think particularly from an LDSO, because obviously we've got lots of LDSOs. They'll all have their own sort of working practices, and we just need come up with some. We just need to be clear on the sort of common approach. I think it's less. When we're working through examples for some of the other service desks, which are more by the nature are more centralised, and it's a different
indeed,
different challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah, but we can work together on that, I guess, can't we? And, so at the risk of sound like I was putting you on the spot, what I mean is I'd really appreciate your support on kind of getting a resolution on that. That's what I was looking for, John.
Yeah.
But
something that,
yes, it's not for you
to play back. Yeah. So I think if we maybe take into consideration what Paul said.
Absolutely, yeah.
A bit of a straw man, and then we can play it back to LDSOs.
Indeed, I think that's a great idea. Thanks, John, and thanks, Paul Ban, for that feedback. It's really useful. I think there's a couple of people still waiting to speak. Paul Daniels.
Mark and John, just beforehand, if this is going to go out for consultation next week, do you need to then loop back with Paul on Friday to run through it?
Potentially, yes. I guess I just need probably just need a quick offline chat, don't we, John W, about how we can take this forward. But potentially, Jason, yes, yeah.
I'm just thinking of timing. If this is due to go out for consultation on Monday, it doesn't leave much time. And if I think you probably need to loop back round with Paul before it goes out, or someone similar.
I completely agree. But this was just a sample flow rather than it being a defined process. The idea was to present this as an example of how we want to present things. So whilst we'd like to, it absolutely needs to be as accurate as possible. If we need to loop back with Paul and John by the end of the week, absolutely, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, because I do think for consistency, we do, and certainly to Johnny's point around this being codified, like we did have this session with Paul. I don't know if you were on that last one, where we did walk through this with LDSOs exclusively. And it wasn't sort of.
I think there's been a lot of questioning from LDSOs as to
what
the intention here is, John. And I don't think it's looking at what's being presented today. It obviously hasn't surfaced properly.
Yeah,
so that's what I'm trying to do now.
The point you've sort of made about not having sort of if you like a customer-facing service desk. I don't think that really came out in that previous discussion, and certainly in the when we were doing the strategy, we have this concept of
it's certainly been made by Electricity Northwest. It was actually in one of our consultation responses, and I was accepted as such.
Yeah, and I think what we did do is we changed the strategy to use the wording of an LDSO help desk. But I think what we're talking about now is which that concept has always been present within the strategy, is that the LDSOs will have a help desk, but equally that they'll continue to operate their existing arrangements. But I think we do need to put a bit of clarity around, from a consistency point of view, what does that mean? Because we've mentioned desktop, we've mentioned sort of telephone calls, and I think I think from my perspective, we just need to document something that everybody's comfortable with, as we articulate that. Does that make sense, Paul? Are you happy with that? If we sort of take that away and think about it, sort of have a further discussion.
It needs to go to all of the LDSOs. I can only speak on behalf of Electricity Northwest, John.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul Daniels, you've had your hand up for quite a while.
That's all right. No worries. I think hopefully mine's a straightforward one. John, I think you mentioned when you were voicing that over that if the LDSO reached a particular stage that they would need to raise something with the DIP service provider. I'm not sure that's what the flow says. I think the answer is they raise it with Elexon, who triage it, and then it gets passed through to the dip. So can I just check, just make sure that I've understood that correctly?
That's the principle, is that obviously Elexon are the point of entry, if you like, for any cases, and they will then determine whether it needs to go through to any of the service providers like yourself, Paul.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem at all. Eddie.
Yeah, I know we've just really been speaking about the interaction with the LDSO in terms of having an exposed industry service desk, but I just wanted to just make the point that that will probably be the same for different agents. I know for ourselves, a metering service, we wouldn't have a sort of industry exposed service desk to raise these types of message issues with. So I just wanted to just make that point that that issue might be a bit more wider than the LDSO.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, Eddie, and I think certainly in the context of this, when the Elexon guys have been looking at it, I think they're obviously when we talk about cross-service desk interaction, I think they're particularly focused on the other centralised services like EES, DCC. It also, because LDSOs are so central, we need to have a common approach for LDSOs, and then I think suppliers and agents, then the recognition is that obviously you'll all have different ways of working, and it may be that Elexon needs to contact their service desk, needs to contact a specific organisation because of an issue that's been raised, but that would need to be managed via the fact that each organisation would have a set of users set up in ServiceNow. Rather than defining how each individual supplier or agent operated their individual sort of service support functions.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably see that being more as a sort of a telephone or a kind of sort of central email address type of service. But like I say, just wanted to make that point that agents such as yourself will have a similar issue.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's what you're intending, aren't you? Is that you've looked for people to provide contacts for you, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And when we say log things, Eddie, that literally can be whatever the organisation feels is appropriate for their organisation, whether that be email, telephone call, portal, carrier pigeon, whatever is appropriate for a particular organisation. That's absolutely fine. I think we've used the generic term of logging something to indicate that that's being passed over to somebody else and the information provided. So if that is just if that is an email, that's absolutely fine. And I think that's part of the table we were trying to pull together around kind of how people can interact with different organisations, whether that be email, phone call. There's a portal, whether people need to be registered on a portal, all those kind of things. There's many different ways of kind of interacting with different service desks, and even if it's not a service desk, of getting cases or incidents or requests raised with a particular organisation.
Yeah, that's fine, Mark. Thank you.
All right, no problem. Paul.
Yeah, just very quickly, it was inter help desk contacts aside, I think just going back to first principles, where the supplier's actually looking at the DIP portal to check the stuff out, they can actually see far more than what you're implying here, because they can do searches on NPAN level, at an NPAN level, so they will get much more information, including the stuff that's coming out from the LDSOs as well, on the response messages back. And so it's the DIP portal checker, or the message checker, it can be done at an NPAN level, so you can see all the flows and all the messages related to that NPAN, wherever they come from. And the suppliers, they own the NPAN, will actually get that information, so they can probably do a lot more investigation before immediately passing it off to an LDSO for further analysis. So just to bring that into the mix, and because it implies here that it's a very quick handoff to LDSOs, and to all the LDSOs on this call and their nervousness about picking up lots of calls by whatever method, yeah, the supplier can actually do possibly more interaction and more investigation than is being implied here.
Yeah, we'd absolutely call that out in a bit more detail in the triage piece in the document in the run book we're pulling together. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what's important there, Paul, isn't it, is to have a clear set of documentation around what can and can't be done in the DIP portal.
Yeah,
and you know that's going to be really important, then, isn't it? Because you know that's got to be the aim of this, is that you know we're shifting left all of the triage and everything else, and there's an awful lot that individual participants can do, you know, prior to raising any incidents with any third parties. Yeah. And then obviously they need to have undertaken that triage to be able to provide, you know, if they still believe there's an issue, to then provide a sort of rich piece of, you know, rich amount of information that would allow, you know, that third parties to then undertake triage successfully.
Yeah, they should. I mean, the suppliers should be able to see at LEMPAN level, like the interface 31 to 36, all the way through, because they own the MPAN, so they can do that search and do that investigation and potentially, yeah, cut out any unnecessary handoffs to LDSO, etc. Yeah, it doesn't include the DSPs, where an LDSO is using a DSP, and that it may be logged there. But yeah, they can do potentially a lot more than is indicated here.
Yeah, but I think what we do need for that is obviously, you know, what's going to be really important then is that you know, clarity around the portal, isn't it? Around what can and can't be.
And that full details of triage and stuff, and you know what's possible and what's not. And that's exactly what we're looking to put in the run book. Okay, Royston.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Really interesting discussion. Obviously, unearthing a few industry risks in terms of capacity for handling contact and how robust that contact is at the moment. I think, you know, from the point of view of this cross-party stuff, we're really, you know, the key to us is understanding where the handoffs are, both into Elexon and out of Elexon, and making sure that those processes are really well defined. There's certainly been some good points made this morning that we need to take away and think about in terms of how, you know, we make sure that those processes are clear and are robust and you know, can work again and again as they need to. But yeah, just I guess thanks to Paul and the others for raising these points.
Yeah, it's also the wider piece as well. It's not just stuff getting handed into Elexon either, Royston. It's stuff that might not even come to Elexon as well.
Yeah,
so it's an industry-wide piece of work as well.
And I think the other thing to just call out, which we haven't really touched on yet, is like how important the knowledge base is going to be in terms of, you know, giving that information around the DIP and use of it and the services and understanding how to interact with the service and the service desk in a way that minimizes contacts that are incorrect. So.
Okay, thanks. Jackie, hi.
Hi, just wanted to clarify. So, is the supplier able to log an incident with Elexon?
Yes, anybody can log an incident with Elexon. Yes.
So, if a flow has gone through, or the suppliers raise a concern that they haven't received something, and the LDSO is able to say yes, it's gone. Surely that's the end of the LDSO's obligation, and then it should be the supplier then should be raising it with Elexon.
So yeah, there's two things on that. First of all, this is just one example scenario, and we are going to draw other scenarios out that would kind of would follow that principle as well. So we'll draw that one out as part of this piece of work. And the other element was we definitely, as John hinted at earlier, we're working on a principle of whoever picks it up generally deals with it, unless it's something that's quite clearly not the responsibility, or that party would not be a part of a potential resolving party. The organisation pick it up. So this flow could quite easily be flipped on its head a little bit with the LDSO and the Elexon piece being reversed. Sorry, Johnny, I'm assuming you put your hand up because you've got something to say on this.
Yeah, sorry, Mark.
Yeah.
It was just I think backing up what you were saying. I think from my point of view, in this instance, so the DNO would do their triage, etc. They would say that the flow had been sent to the DIP. If they then saw that it had been processed by the DIP, I'd then probably expect them to say, look, it's been sent, it's been processed, it's been sent to you, supplier issue. If they then saw that there was a problem with it being sent to the DIP and it hasn't been processed by the DIP, and as a sender, then expect them to raise that query to say, we send you a flow, hasn't been processed. I think kind of that's where I was seeing it, because it's probably going to come back to DNO as a problem if the flow hasn't been able to be processed for validation reasons, etc. There could be an issue with the format, etc. DNO needs to resolve. If it's gone through, then it's probably at the supplier end, and they need to resolve it. That makes sense.
Is that okay, Jackie?
Yeah, but that's not what this flow is showing, is it? It's saying that if the DNO sees that it's fine, or the LDSO sees that it's fine, and then they raise an issue with Elexon. It's not showing anything going back to the supplier to say everything looks fine at our end. You need to sort it out, kind of thing.
Well, I think in this instance, though, Jackie, if you sort of follow this process through, what's effectively happening is the suppliers said, we can't see any evidence that the message was sent into the DIP by the LDSO. So they've raised an issue with the LDSO saying, I was expecting a message and I can't see evidence that you attempted to send the message. The LDSO would then investigate, and I suppose there's two outcomes there. One is, oh yes, something went wrong on our side, we're going to resend the message, it's resolved now. Or we believe that we successfully sent the message, in which case there's an incident now that has occurred between the LDSO and the DIP, and so we'd expect the LDSO to now raise a case with Elexon to say, we believe that we successfully sent the message, but we believe that the DIP has failed in delivering it. So they're now managing, the LDSO is now managing that as an incident because they've transacted with the DIP and they believe that the failure is on the DIP side. I think as a principle, what we wouldn't expect is that the LDSO says, well, we sent it. Supplier, you've now got to chase up the DIP because we're now in the realm where there's a transaction that has exclusively happened between Elexon and the LDSO and the DIP, which has failed. So we'd expect the LDSO to raise that then with the DIP because it's only the LDSO that would have the relevant evidence.
John, sorry to butt in, but that's not strictly true, is it? I mean, we could look at the DIP and everything looks okay from our end.
Well, in that case, that would be, I'd argue that at that point you got, that there's a loop back into the supplier then to say, well, you haven't, your triage, because ultimately the supplier, at that point, you're using the same tooling that the supplier has used.
Well, you're assuming there that there's no problem with the DIP itself, aren't you?
No, not at this point. No, because at this point we're assuming that there is an issue with the DIP because the LDSO believes that they sent it successfully. They believe that the DIP responded that the message has been sent successfully, but the LDSO still can't see any evidence that the message was delivered.
I think that's what the bottom part of the flow kind of would show. So to your point there, John, if it would get logged with Elexon, it'd be investigated and triaged, and then follow.
I agree with the earlier person who made the comment that you're putting a load of onus on DNOs to potentially sort stuff that is not their problem.
Well, at this point, we don't know where the problem lies, Paul, because I think at this point,
I know, but you're putting the ownership of the incident in the hands of the DNO when the DNO is established that the message was sent to the DIP.
Well, I think at this point though, you wouldn't have established that the message has been successfully sent to the DIP because it's there's been it hasn't been successfully delivered.
Well, that's the other side of the coin, isn't it? The only side of the coin I see is that I've sent a message to the DIP and I got a response and I got an acceptance from the DIP. That's the last I see of that message. What happens beyond that? I don't know. It's like posting a letter in a letterbox. I posted the letter.
Yeah, in this example, though, Paul, you might not have got you haven't got a successful response from the DIP in this scenario.
We're possibly missing a level of clarity here then, because the process flow just says message sent to the DIP. Yes, log an incident.
That you believe you've successfully sent a message to the DIP, and that you can't resolve it within your own systems. But this isn't something that as an LDSO you can resolve now, because you believe that your systems were working correctly, but for whatever reason the transaction hasn't occurred within the DIP.
But what I'm saying is that there's a level of detail here. If I've received an acknowledgement from the DIP when I've sent my message, then the handshake's complete. I've done my part of the bargain.
But I think what we were trying to avoid then is going back to the supplier at that particular point and getting the supplier then to log it themselves with Elexon.
But you're putting a load of work onto the DNO's shoulders when they have no responsibility for it.
I understand that, but the steer we were given was that people want to avoid bouncing around kind of incidents of going back to the supplier then logs it with Elexon looks at it and says, well, we've checked Albits look fine, and it goes back to the supplier again. The purpose of this was to make
exactly why a central service desk model is better, in my personal opinion. I think I've said my piece. I won't say any more for now, anyway.
Yeah, because in this instance, though, Paul, if you believe that the LDSO successfully sent the message, it's only really the LDSO then that has access to that evidence, isn't it? That could then provide it through to the DIP. The supplier doesn't have any of that evidence that would allow the DIP or Elexon, to triage that. The evidence that would allow successful triage could only come from the LDSO. In this particular scenario.
No, I'm sorry. It can come from Helix as a DIP operator.
Not in this scenario where that we've walked through here, where the response hasn't been the response hasn't been received.
Can I just jump in at this point, and in the eagerness to move through other content that we've got today, I think we've unearthed a really important debate in terms of how this is going to work and how we're going to manage the contact points and the triage. I think that it's clearly a debate that's probably bigger than this call that we need to take into another call and discuss, in depth, and then reproduce that information to the other stakeholders. But if everybody's comfortable with that.
Okay. So, Michael, you got your hand up as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm at UKPN, so LDSO. Excuse me. Yeah, I just wanted to support what Paul's been saying. I think there's a lot to learn from what happened in smart metering, because when that was started in 2018, the DCC was a central point for any sort of inter-participant problems, and it just didn't work. So we would raise an incident with the DCC as they were, and then they would pass it on to maybe the supplier, or vice versa. And these incidents never got resolved. So I'd be interested to see what governance you got on these sort of scenarios, in terms of making sure, the LDSA does their work or the supplier does their bit. because it certainly didn't work in smart metering.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that's going to come down to the individual organisations kind of monitoring their ingress and whether ingress is appropriate and whether things have been done appropriately. To kind of previous comments, that there isn't an overall central service desk for. Sorry, Michael, go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to cross you on.
No, you weren't. I was just going to say, on taking that incident, an instance raised with the LDSO, and the LDSO doesn't do anything about it. What happens? Because I'm just conscious. Smart metering, we were raising incidents, and never got resolved. These were real problem issues with smart meter installations, and losing contact with the metering, stuff like that. And that's anyway. I'll just support what Paul said.
Sorry, there's a lot of background noise from somebody there.
Yeah, there is. Not me.
That's better. Okay, thanks, Michael. Elaine, you got your hand up?
I do, yeah. I've put a bit in the chat. I've had to dip in and out of the call, so I'm not really sure, if this has been discussed. But my concern, other than everything that Paul or Jackie's already covered, is that if incidents come direct to each LDSO, how... If it was a major incident in terms of, so maybe not a major catastrophic incident, but if there was an issue with the DIP and that was passed through and each LDSO then had to raise an incident, would that not delay any kind of trend analysis or identification if there was a bigger issue there? I suppose that's my concern, because it's kind of been diluted, if you like.
No, from a major incident perspective, Elaine, no, because I would expect there to be so many points of ingress, and Paul D, who's on the call, might advise on this as well. And certainly when it comes to things like the alerting from DIP, I would expect for an issue with DIP to be identified way before people are actually picking up the phone and calling us, because of the alerting and monitoring that's in place. So it's given the nature of the tooling, DIP is not the monitoring on DIP is not passive in the way that we would sit there and kind of wait for lots of people to ring in and, oh, hang on, we're getting lots of calls about DIP. Should we, would we take a look at that point? The answer is no. We would be looking at that monitoring and alerting things to pick up issues before they're being reported en masse. The reporting en masse would generally just provide more supporting evidence to what the underlying issue might be.
Okay.
Does that satisfy your query, Elaine, or do I need to expand?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think that might be useful to have
expand
some
on that
kind
bit
of
more for people.
information on that in relation to this. Because I suppose I have a huge concern about the number of incidents that we might get. As a DNO, that is my big concern. And the amount of FTE and the cost that may mean for us in terms of, that won't be an allowed revenue if those volumes are high.
Yeah, understood. So certainly from that major incident point of view, Elaine, I think it probably makes sense for us to expand some of the section on the DIP within the service operations manual about the alerting and monitoring and how that works, to give people a level of comfort that is being managed at a level, and we can work with our colleagues managing the DIP on making sure we've got some text that satisfies that and gives people, like I say, that level of comfort that that's being managed and monitored. With regard to that overall model, like we were saying earlier, myself and John certainly, and others. Sorry, I wasn't trying to stitch John up. We will kind of go away and kind of have a little bit more of a think about that model, and we've gone through this on a number of occasions now. So I guess we just need to revisit this with some of the feedback we've had today, and it has been really useful feedback. To try and have a bit more of a closer think on that kind of the interaction piece with kind of the LDSOs, and to Paul's point, how is that done, and to your point, what are the volumes looking like? So it's definitely going to give us some stuff to take away, to have a think about. This particular example was just an example of a flow where we're looking for people to provide us some examples of other scenarios that we can draw up in a similar style, and then kind of present back and agree that the finer detail. And I recognise there's some language here that we probably need to correct, but it's definitely given us plenty of kind of thought around that interaction piece between the supplier and the LDSO stuff that we need to kind of look at. Stuart.
Hi there, Stuart from CNC Group. I think just sort of cover off what Paul and other people have said. I think the biggest concern that we should be looking for here is the customer journey. I think, judging by the conversations that have been discussed and things that have been said, I do have some concerns about the customer journey at the moment, because it seems as though there seems to be different views on how support should work. And I think we just got to nail it down, and because otherwise it could end up being a bit of a mess, and customers, as we say, could be going from suppliers to LDSOs to whoever, and it gets lost in translation, and we don't have that oversight, that governance, and that's the bit that worries me, is the whole oversight of it. Who's gonna take oversight on it? So I think that's the big concern. We've got to bear in mind, at the end of the day, we've got to deliver to our customers and give them the best possible customer journey, because otherwise they'll just get frustrated with the whole thing as well.
Indeed, Stuart, and thanks for that. And I guess that's part of the underlying principle of, we didn't want somebody to ring Elexon, and not just on this scenario, but any scenario, and go, well, it's not us. Could you ring ring the LDSO? Can you? And then the LDSO picks up the call. Now it's not us either, and people starting to get bounced around. We were looking for the most effective way of managing that customer journey. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So, does anybody have any further questions on the example flow that we've presented back at all? I think I'll try and move. Oh, Johnny, go on.
I'm really sorry, but I think it's a standard one. But I think what we probably need to do is ensure that the principles cover which party is expected to raise DIP queries. So we talked about making sure, as part of the principles, that the raiser of the ticket is going to do a full triage using the DIP portal. I think we need to cover that off. And then I think it needs to be clear in the principles that if the sender of the flow has evidence suggested they've sent it, but it hasn't been processed by the DIP, that it's them. But if it's been processed by the DIP and there's evidence in the DIP portal that it's been sent to the end user, then it's the end user's problem. They need to raise a ticket if required. I think that just high level guidance would probably help a lot of this fit together better.
Yeah, completely agree, Johnny. No, thanks for that.
You can move on now, Mark.
Thank you. And Ellen also agrees with you, looking at the chat as well. So no, seriously, John, thanks for your input there. So we will. Oh, sorry, I need to zoom back out on this. So we will send this deck out for Pete. Oh, sorry, I have to go back. As part of this as well, we are kind of asking for scenarios where people think they may have some scenarios that may involve kind of cross-party. We're only asking literally for a description, any assumptions that we've made as part of that scenario, and any impacted parties, and then we'll kind of engage with people to get the level of detail. The slide deck includes a QR code, which I've learned how to do, and it includes a URL for people like me that are over 50. If people could come back with some scenarios by the end of next week, that would be appreciated. and equally, if people want to, have conversations about potential scenarios and not just fill the form in, I think we're more than happy to engage and have conversations with people to kind of to get provide a bit more detail should people need it. I think there's 2 more slides to go. I think these, Royston, are with you, I think, aren't they? So let's go to sorry. At that point, I've finished my bit. Does anybody have any further questions for me? Okay, I'll hand over to Royston. Thanks, Royston.
Thanks, Mark. Hopefully this will be a less active part of the discussion in the time that we have left. So I guess, first of all, hello to everybody. I've just onboarded with the team to help with some of the stakeholder comms and planning for the launch of the service desk for the M10 milestone. What I would just want to talk through in the slide is a bit of where we've been to so far, some successfully, some perhaps less successfully, judging on the conversation that we're having, but we're certainly looking to learn and develop the way that we're interacting with people and improve in the way that we're capturing insights and building those into our planning. So as it says here, it's very much iterative approach to building the cross-party service desk model and agreeing the incident scenarios. We want to make sure that we're moving at pace and validating the model, but we also want to make sure that we're evolving, getting the documentation right, and listening to people and gain increased confidence from you in the process as we move through it. To date, there's been a number of sessions that have been broken out with different parties, looking at the combined understanding of the cross-party service desk model and trying to define scenarios and look at the next steps. Some of those actions are still ongoing and progressing through. We have had sessions, even last week, with the DNOs, IDNOs, and there's clearly some things that we need to work on in terms of reviewing that information, building it into the model, and taking from today's session and really understanding where those gaps are and what can be done to address them. And as noted here, the overarching model, as Mark described it earlier in the call, which I think is fairly well accepted at this point, we're looking to push out for consultation next week and gather people's feedback on those overarching principles and kind of hooks that we'll be using to build the workbook and the other information around. Any questions before we move to the next slide? I just wait in case there's any last second hands up. No, okay. As we've progressed through the service design, operational readiness testing planning, we're also working to the following key dates. So as noted, consultation on the cross-desk model and the operational readiness testing approach coming out next week, taking into account Easter and the fact that many of you will be taking time away, so extended to the 22nd of April to give everybody adequate chance to review and respond. There'll also be a consultation on the test scripts, the operational readiness testing, which will be at the start of May for 2 weeks. And then in parallel to that, we will be beginning to engage bilaterally and through forums and webinars with participants and stakeholders around the operational readiness testing and user scheduling, with a particular focus on that at the start of May. And then the operational readiness test execution, we're currently aiming to achieve that throughout June. We're obviously working with the programme to confirm those ORT dates and do the preparation tasks and governance to get it signed off. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, Royston. You got a few less questions than I did, but so again, just thanks everyone for coming along. Appreciate it's a big ask on people's time. Really appreciate people taking the time out of the day to attend and listen. Oh, Paul, you got a question? Is it for me or
No,
Royce?
it was, no, well, generally, really.
Okay.
With your consultation going out on Monday, are you giving any indication to, in your example that we talked through for an hour and a bit, about how many of these you're expecting a day? I mean, change supply, etc. There's going to be thousands a day, and the majority will hopefully work. But have you given any indication to the numbers that you're expecting to fail, and then have to loop into this process?
Are you talking about the number of scenarios, Paul? Are you talking about the number of instances that would fall into the scenario?
Yeah, change supply for argument's sake. Yeah, that's a cross-party interaction from suppliers to registration, etc. And yeah, there will be thousands of those every day. A proportion of those will fail and have to follow this process. Have you done any modelling on any of that?
I've not been involved in any of the volumetrics piece at all, but I can certainly take that one away, Paul.
Okay.
Because there has been a wider piece, as I understand it, on the kind of volumetrics around the
volumetrics. There was a meeting last Monday about volumetrics.
Okay.
But that was really around the numbers of calls that we as a design team have dealt with over the last coming up 2 years, and the numbers of questions, and that's not resolving the types of scenarios that you've put here. That's general questions that are coming into the design mailbox, for argument's sake, which is in like 6,000 we've dealt with. But this is more the types of stuff we deal with through testing. Is a good triage of testing, and where they're running test scripts and they don't quite work, or they don't follow the instructions, or there's timing issues and stuff. And I didn't know whether you've had any analysis done on, given the volumes and the ramp up of migration, and then as basically parties start to switch and customers start to switch, how many of these exceptions, and they are exceptions, are you estimating you're going to get? Because I think it could be quite considerable.
I haven't, Paul. My role is more in the kind of service design space, but I'll certainly take that question away, and we'll come back with an answer on that.
Yeah, but in the service design space, I think it's a consideration that needs to be looked at.
Okay. Ellen.
Hello. Just interested, and appreciate it. You're probably going to release this next week based on your timeline, but just in terms of who you're going to need to support the operational readiness testing, which participants, if that's across SIT or broader than that, across wider market-wide participants, and obviously from a program perspective, obviously that timing does clash with the settlement testing and the regression test phases for SIT. So it's just, again, it's making sure that people can support that period of time.
Yeah, I don't know if those individuals have been identified yet, but Ian, are you still on?
Yeah, they haven't been identified yet, but very soon we'll start identifying and communicating out.
Great. Will that come with the testing approach next week?
No, that won't be with the testing approach. That would be a separate piece of work.
Okay.
But it is on our plan.
Okay, it'd be great to just know when that might be.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, thanks everyone for your time. Thanks everyone for your feedback, and we'll speak again soon. Have a great day. Thanks everyone.
Cheers, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.